Deep within America's wilderness, thousands of hikers vanish mysteriously in our national forests every year. So, despite exhaustive search efforts, it's like they've been erased from history. But there's a problem. These cases aren't isolated incidents. What's happening to these hikers and why? You won't want to miss this one. In October of 2018, 29-year-old Jordan Grider established his campsite in northern Minnesota's Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness, overlooking a beaver slough, which is a slow-moving, swampy section of a river. On October 8th, Jordan photographed a beaver pond near his campsite. This detail is important for later. And the following day, on October 9th, Jordan left his campsite and drove to the nearest convenience store to purchase food and supplies. However, he wouldn't respond to text messages or phone calls, and his family began to get really worried about him after several days had passed. His family called the police, and once law enforcement drove there, they found no signs of Jordan. But they found his white truck parked in the front of a private gate off the Sioux Hustler Trail. Police knew that Jordan was an off-the-grid kind of guy who had already spent countless weeks living in the woods of Upper New York and Kentucky. Additionally, he had just finished celebrating his birthday a couple of weeks before with his parents and 5 brothers, so there was no conflict or any reason to ghost his family. Conservation Officer Sean Williams led the search as they scoured slopes and the untamed wilderness using snowmobiles in search of Jordan. Williams knew that if they wanted to find him, they would have to search in places that would offer protection from the north wind during this time of year. I mean, this is not an easy place to be camping. It's extremely cold, with temperatures staying below zero and dropping 30 below at night. Factor in wind chill and 50 to 60 inches of snowfall, and it just makes for a brutal winter. Now, despite these challenges, authorities continue to search for Jordan. Still, because of the landscape's geography and the fast approaching winter, their resources were limited. Now, fast forward to April of 2019, and Williams discovered a very remote, abandoned campsite. There were bloodstains all over a sleeping bag, hammock, and a green tarp that hung over the hammock. Inside the hammock was an unused 9mm Beretta pistol with 2 magazines. Williams believed that this had to have been Jordan's campsite, but what happened, he wasn't sure. Unfortunately, at this time, the campsite was still under roughly 2 to 4 feet of snow. And so a few days later, the team returned after the snow had melted and discovered bones scattered around the campsite. And additionally, they found a shredded jacket and other bits of clothing. They discovered 2 more bones off-site after bringing in cadaver dogs and a larger team. Now, unfortunately, with 20 to 30 people doing the 1x1 grid walk, a skull was never found. They did find Jordan's cell phone, but after analyzing it, they realized that the last activity on his phone was a picture sent in a family group message sent on October 8th, 2018. Now, despite what little evidence Williams and the authorities discovered, none of it pointed to foul play or suicide. Fast forward again to August 21st, 2020, when the University of North Texas Health Science Center for Human Identification confirmed that the bones found belonged to Jordan Grider. But the clues found at the campsite pointed to something more ominous. Jordan's family hypothesized that when Jordan went to sleep the first night in his hammock, he was attacked by a group of wolves, which would make sense considering wolf tracks and scat were found. But most of the blood spatters were found inside the hammock, and there were no signs of a struggle with a wolf, let alone an entire pack of them. Thomas Gable, an expert on wolves at the University of Minnesota, explained that because wolves are messy killers, there just wasn't enough carnage at the campsite to justify it being a wolf kill. Additionally, no bite marks were reported on the bones, or the hammock being damaged if the wolves had removed Jordan's body post-mortem. And one of Jordan's favorite hobbies was to whittle wood, and he often took multiple knives with him, which he kept very sharp and used for shaving. But the several knives that were found at the campsite were all sheathed and contained no traces of blood. The known detail in this case is that Jordan seemed to have been attacked while sleeping in his hammock. The question remains, who or what could have attacked him with such force and speed that he couldn't use his pistol? There is online speculation that this was clearly the work of a Bigfoot or Wendigo that had come into his campsite at night, attacked and killed him, and then took off with his body, or parts of his body, and that wolves came in post-mortem and ate what remained of Jordan. To this day, there is still no official cause of death for Jordan Grider, even though the case is closed. What happened to Jordan that October night in 2018 remains a mystery. On July 30th, 2018, 27-year-old Samantha Seers posted to Facebook asking if anyone was interested in hiking an 8-mile loop on Vesper Peak with her. Vesper Peak is in the North Cascades of Washington State in the Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Forest. Sadly, no one responded, so she just decided to go solo. And 2 days later, on August 1st, 2018, Sam kissed her boyfriend Kevin Dares goodbye and headed out around 8 in the morning. Kevin, a 33-year-old from New Orleans who ran a real estate business, couldn't join her that day due to work commitments. He texted her, telling her to be careful and call if she needed anything. Sam's response, her last text to Kevin, simply read, "Okay, baby, I love you." Sam drove from her Seattle apartment for about an hour and a half to reach the Sunrise Mine trailhead. It was already a beautiful day, with just a faint haze from the distant wildfires. And she arrived at the trailhead around 10:30 in the morning, parked her blue Ford Fiesta, and signed the trail register. Sam began her trek up the Sunrise Mine Trail, a challenging route that would take her above 4,000 feet in elevation. The trail was no joke. I mean, you were winding through switchbacks, across boulder fields, and eventually leading to patches of snow near the summit. But Sam was very experienced and ready for the challenge. And as she made her way up, other hikers on the trail that day would later recall seeing Sam. And you know, she was pretty hard to miss with her bald head and distinctive tattoo. It was a busy day on the mountain, and even for a weekday, with the pleasant weather drawing quite a crowd. Now, she finally reached the summit around 2 or 3 p.m., and one witness later reported seeing her at the top, sitting down and enjoying a sandwich while watching some rock climbers nearby. Sam was also seen chatting with other hikers hanging around the summit. Meanwhile, Kevin was going about his day back in Seattle, expecting Sam to be home by 6 p.m. as they had planned. But as the hours ticked by and evening approached, there was no sign of Sam. Kevin started to get worried. He tried calling her cell phone several times, but it went straight to voicemail. Normally, this wouldn't be too concerning because the cell signal in that area of the Cascades was spotty at best, with only a few patches near the peak where you might get a bar or two. But Sam was always highly organized and punctual regarding her hikes. As it got later and later, with no word from her, Kevin decided that he was going to look for Sam himself. Around 8 p.m., Kevin headed out to the Sunrise Mine trailhead, a 90-minute drive from Seattle. He stopped at a gas station to buy a flashlight, figuring he might need it if he had to search in the dark. His heart sank when he arrived at the trailhead, and there in the parking lot was Sam's blue Ford Fiesta. She hadn't made it back to the car, and because of the circumstances, he would now have to take this treacherous hiking path in the dark with only a flashlight. But he was not deterred by this and started up the trail at around 10 p.m., moving quickly through the first part of the hike that meanders through the thick forest. the trail crosses the South Fork of the Stillaguamish River, where hikers have to jump from boulder to boulder to cross a few feet of water. And after that, the trail elevates through a series of switchbacks cut into a hillside covered in heavy timber. You can only imagine the anxiety and dread he was feeling for hours as he navigated his way in the dark, consumed by thoughts of Sam and hoping she was okay and not dead somewhere down in a ravine. And as he worked his way up to Vesper Peak, he lost his balance, tripped, and broke his flashlight. He had no other choice but to turn back, using his cell phone as a light to guide him the 3.5 miles back to the car. Then, Kevin drove 20 miles down the Mountain Loop Highway to the Verlo Public Service Center, defeated but not deterred. It's a visitor center staffed by U.S. Forest Service Rangers, and even though it was closed when he arrived, it did have a payphone. And so it was around 1:30 or 2 in the morning when Kevin made the call that would set off one of the largest search and rescue ops in the area's history. Search and Rescue Sergeant John Q. Adams from the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office arrived. Kevin was eager to replace his broken flashlight and head back up to Vesper to continue his search. But Adams and his deputy, Peter Tesk, who would also play a huge role, strongly urged Kevin not to return alone in the dark. They just had a feeling about it. Adams turned to Tesk and even said, "We better throw everything we've got at this, at least for a couple of days." So they gave Kevin a helmet, some food, and a headlamp. Then, they contacted Snohomish County volunteer search and rescue teams to request immediate assistance. At 6 a.m. on Thursday, August 2nd, 2018, the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office launched what would become one of the longest and largest rescue efforts authorities had made in years. When volunteers arrived, they split into teams and started combing the trail. Everett Mountain Rescue, a team trained to explore Vesper, arrived on the scene, and by the weekend, volunteer search and rescue teams from 5 neighboring counties and 4 other mountain rescue squads had joined in on the effort. Trained sniffer dogs and expert human trackers scoured for footprints, while others searched the creeks. And despite the massive effort, there was no trace of Sam. On August 4th, the Air Force Rescue Coordination Center actively monitored Sam's phone for pings when it connected to nearby cellular sites, and they hadn't picked up anything since the afternoon of the 1st, when Sam's phone had pinged near the summit with limited cell service. But then, out of the blue, Sam's phone pinged, and it was in Seattle, in Belltown. But it turned out to be a false alarm. The Seattle PD was dispatched to the coordinates, but she wasn't there when they knocked on the door. It was later discovered that Kevin's mother, Dawn, who had flown in from Louisiana, caused the ping, that she had spent the day working with the phone carrier to access Sam's missing cell phone information. The phone carrier said the best they could do was load the SIM signature onto Dawn's mobile, effectively cloning her iPhone. That was what had pinged. And despite this setback, the search continued with incredible intensity. 70 searchers on foot, 14 dog teams, and helicopters scoured the Vesper area. And at one point, drone operators and the Sheriff's Marine Unit were involved. In addition, volunteer searchers from all around the state spent thousands of hours leaving bags with a note saying, "Stay strong, we're looking for you, everyone is thinking of you," along with various survival supplies. And interestingly, the man who ate lunch with Sam near the summit of Vesper Peak explained to police that after parting ways, Sam headed west, which leads down to Spada Lake. However, he noticed from afar that it was too late to warn her, but despite this new information and the massive search effort, there were still no signs of Sam. It was as if she had vanished. Meanwhile, her boyfriend Kevin was doing everything he could to keep the search going. He created multiple Facebook posts, created a Facebook page, started a GoFundMe. He was desperate for answers, as were all her family and friends. And despite all these efforts, 3 weeks later, on August 23rd, 2018, after thousands of hours invested in finding Sam, the search was called off. They had exhausted all leads and tips. They had interviewed all the witnesses who had come forward. They had even double-checked all possible routes Sam could have taken. If there was a place they thought Sam could get to, they put people out there to look for her, no matter how dangerous or risky the rugged terrain was. But because Sam's friend and family had raised more than $60,000 with their GoFundMe campaign, they continued the search with any resources they could. This included private helicopters, dog teams, and even a professional tracker. Around the end of October, David Francis, a man from Minnesota who had lost his son 13 years prior, flew out to Seattle to meet up with Kevin and the county search and rescue to coordinate their efforts. Now, with his connections, he brought in a highly experienced mountain man, Bud Carr. Now, Carr was a survivalist, an Eagle Scout who had earned just about every badge he could. Even though his personality was abrasive, his experience and military mindset would be a massive asset in their search for Sam. And so you had these three men quickly moving into the planning phase where they mapped out all the resources they could use internally and externally. Kevin, who had previous experience in the Navy, had asked his father, the command chief warrant officer in the Louisiana National Guard, to manage a mountain camp they were going to set up. But even with all of these additional search efforts and several more team and solo trips all around the mountain into mid-November, they never found Sam. Even after all this, there was supposed sightings of a bald woman across Washington state, but nothing concrete. People go missing all the time in national parks and forests, but for Sam, her disappearance was definitely strange. One of the more plausible theories is that because prospectors discovered large amounts of gold and silver in the late 1800s, and the Sunrise Mine was dug up around this Wirtz Basin, there could be any number of deep mine shafts and even ventilation corridors dug down into the mountain that were covered up and hidden by underbrush. If she fell into one of these, she'd be a goner. But on the other hand, her family, who had hired a team of private investigators since her disappearance, strongly believes she was taken into sex trafficking. This is also supported by the fact that people talked about seeing two suspicious men that day, but as to whether they were following or tracking Sam, it's hard to say for sure. However, Sam's mother, Lisa, firmly believes that Kevin is directly involved with her daughter's disappearance. Unfortunately, she's withholding the information she supposedly has about him. When questioned, she just says the truth will come to light eventually. So who really knows? Despite thousands of dollars in resources and search and rescue operations, no trace of Sam has ever been found. And sadly, the truth about what happened to her that day in 2018 remains a mystery. On April 11th, 2019, Catherine Hammond, her dog, and 6 other hikers traversed through the beautiful, rugged, and dangerous terrain of the Devil's Canyon, located near San Felipe in Baja California. At the time, Kat was dealing with 3 fractured toes on her right foot from an accident with an ice chest a week earlier. Moreover, it was sweltering outside and the heat radiated from all the rocks around her. 10 minutes in, her foot was throbbing so badly that she struggled to walk and decided to rest by a pool while the 6 others continued. They would be back within an hour or so to check on her, and she was with her dog, who played in the water to cool off. Before the group left her, one of the hikers lit a cigarette for Kat and continued with the group. Once the group had made the loop, roughly 90 minutes later, Kat and her dog were gone. The first thing they thought was that her husband at the time, Warren Sundquist, had been waiting in a Jeep at the trailhead entrance, and that's where she went. However, after they headed to the parking lot, Warren explained he hadn't seen her. The group became panic-stricken that Kat was now stranded out there, limping around with a hurt foot and limited resources in the sweltering heat. Even after they frantically searched the area, calling her name until their voices grew hoarse, they still couldn't find any trace of her or clues as to where she'd gone. None of it made sense. But between the rugged terrain and extreme temperatures, searching for Kat to any degree would prove treacherous. The official search and rescue op that followed was intense but short-lived. Teams combed through the terrain for 4 grueling days, braving the scorching heat and conditions. And despite their best efforts, they found no trace of Kat or her dog. When the authorities called off the search on April 15th, just 4 days after her disappearance, her family and friends, as you can imagine, were devastated. I mean, how could they give up so soon? Well, their reasoning was that they searched a 5-kilometer perimeter. They found no trace of her. It was a done deal. Kat was out there somewhere and she needed help. Where could she have gone in such a short time, and especially with an injured foot? The longer time went on without any answers, the more questions Kat's family had. Kat's daughter, Desiree Blair, knew her mother was a tough woman, a survivor, because she had battled liver cancer just a year before and underwent chemotherapy. And despite the toll it took on her body, Kat persevered. And because she was an experienced hiker and pretty familiar with the area, details of her disappearance, they weren't adding up. Now, here's something interesting. Just days before the hike, Kat had a heated argument with her husband, Warren. The couple decided to break up, and Kat moved her belongings back to her house. Though they eventually reconciled, the timing of the argument wasn't believed to be coincidental. More so, Warren's behavior after Kat's disappearance also raised questions. He seemed strangely detached, not actively participating in search efforts, at least at first, although later he did lead several unofficial search efforts to try and find his missing wife. Some wondered if Kat had simply wandered off the trail and gotten lost. But think about it. How far could she have gone on an injured foot in just 90 minutes? The official search had covered a radius far beyond what Kat could have realistically traveled, and what about her dog? Another interesting fact about this story is that Kevin, who had walked and laughed with Kat on the trail that day, took his own life just months before the first anniversary of her disappearance. His daughter, also named Desiree, said Kevin had been deeply affected by Kat's case and he was feeling so guilty that he hadn't stayed behind with her. So, was there more going on here than meets the eye? I mean, some speculated that Kat could have been abducted, perhaps by someone she knew, and suspicion immediately fell on her husband at the time. Could their recent argument and sudden reconciliation have been hiding something darker? As it turns out, police had discovered 2 hidden marijuana grows near the area where Kat vanished. The Haitian men guarding the illicit operation were uncooperative and hostile when questioned. Could Kat have stumbled upon something she wasn't meant to see? Well, you have several theories, really, including an intentional disappearance where Kat returned to the parking lot with her dog and left voluntarily to start a new life. But this seems highly unlikely because she had no bank card or passport, and to do so in an area where it's so remote doesn't make a lot of sense. Another theory is that she never hiked and that the entire group fabricated this story to cover up what really happened. Again, though, highly unlikely, but not improbable. Perhaps the most out there theory is that of alien abduction. Devil's Canyon's remote wilderness has long been a hotspot for UFO sightings and unexplained phenomena. Some even suggested that the canyon's name hinted at something much more malevolent. But no matter how you look at this, the fact that Kat and the dog are nowhere to be found is very perplexing. I mean, think about it. How far could this woman have made it in this environment in that time frame? Probably not far. Unfortunately, as of 2024, she still remains missing, and the case remains unsolved. On the morning of October 19th, 2020, 62-year-old Fern Beard embarked on a solo hike on the Prairie Creek Trail in the Sawtooth National Forest in Idaho. And it all started routinely enough. The day before, Fern checked into a hotel near Ketchum, Idaho. She asked the front desk clerk for some trail recommendations, just as any hiker might do. The next morning, she drove her Subaru Crosstrek to the Prairie Creek trailhead, and by 1:17 p.m. had signed the trail log. After that, Fern was up the trail on her way, and the trail isn't exactly a walk in the park, but it's not Mount Everest. It winds through meadows and forests, and then follows a creek up to some alpine lakes. It's very scenic and ideal for experienced hikers. Fast forward to the evening, and Fern doesn't return to her hotel. But because of her background with the outdoors, nobody's really concerned. She knew her way around the backcountry. She was an experienced outdoorswoman, and she'd tackled trails all over Utah where she lived. They assumed she chose to camp out under the stars and would make it back in a day or two. 2 days later, the hotel still hadn't seen any signs of Fern coming in, and she's past her checkout time. This could only mean bad news. They quickly called the Blaine County Sheriff's Office and reported her missing. However, initial leads were scarce. A few others signed the hiker's log around the same time, a family of 5 from Oklahoma, and a couple from Boise. They'd be the last people to see Fern before she vanished into the wilderness. But they did find her car parked at the trailhead, but nothing else out of place. Now, to find Fern, they utilized search and rescue personnel on foot, horseback, cadaver dogs, and drones, focusing on the network trails around Prairie Creek. But Fern was still MIA, and someone like her who knew how to stay on marked paths and knew the basics of survival and how to hunker down and wait for help. This was just out of character. They found nothing during the search that alluded to any kind of makeshift shelter or clues as to where she'd been. And when you're dealing with this sort of evidence, there are only a handful of possibilities. Was Fern attacked by a wild animal? Well, given the lack of any remains, it seemed unlikely. Is it possible she fell into the creek and had been swept away? Some divers searched the nearby pools, but they didn't find anything. And after months and months of additional searches yielding nothing, nobody could figure out how or why Fern just vanished. Something very concerning to think about is right after Fern vanished, temperatures dropped below freezing during the night in the area. So if she was out there, injured or lost, the possibility of her surviving in those conditions was slim. Now fast forward to summer of 2021, now roughly 9 months since her disappearance, and several search teams returned to the Prairie Creek area as a part of a training op. 2 miles up the trail, they found an interesting piece of evidence related to Fern. They found a cell phone that had been left in the area over winter, and after analyzing it, the detectives determined that it actually didn't belong to Fern, but a local man who had lost it while hunting in the fall. Even now, as we're reaching the end of 2024, not only is Fern still missing, but there have been no updates on her case, and her whereabouts continue to remain unknown. And as we reach the end of this episode, I just want to remind you all that these are real people who have loved ones, family, and people that care about them. So if you have any information regarding these cases, please contact the local authorities. And I want you to all comment below among the missing, so that way I know who made it to the end and who didn't. Also, if you guys enjoy storytelling like this where we dive into strange cases of the mysterious and supernatural, smack that like and subscribe button for more content just like this. As always, never forget I love you all, keep an open mind, and I'll see you all in the very next episode.